Gad, you're stuck behind the Maple Gulag up in Canada, where the shit is hitting the fan these days.
Yes. Well, I don't know if you saw, I actually prepared it for you. I just put out a tweet. It's called My Own Donald Trump Orgiastic Dear Diary Entry of Faux Fear. You ready?
Yeah, I got it. I'll bring it up when you read it, and I'll bring it up in 2 seconds.
Now, I was going to splash fake tears on me because I'm so scared. So I'm going to read it for your fans. Here we go. Today, I stand before you as a fearful Jew of color. Now that Trump has won, I realize that my days as a free man are numbered. Also, my wife, who self-identifies as a man, is fearful that he will be sent to a trans gulag. Because my biological female wife is a man, this implies that we are in a same-sex gay marriage. I know that Trump is going to commit a genocide on gay people, so I worry that if we were to ever go to the US, we will be rounded up into extermination camps. Finally, as a behavioral scientist and professor of 30 plus years, I know that Trump is anti-science. Hence, I'm likely going to be fired from my academic job because he plans on eradicating science. I'm looking at the possibility of starting a falafel food truck with my friend Ahmed, but I worry that Trump is going to round up all Muslims. Finally, my husband, meaning my biological female wife who identifies as a man, might wish to have unlimited abortions, and I fear that he won't be able to do that anymore. Please help me. I'm so scared. And then I put in brackets, it's really surprising that Trump won on Tuesday. Do you buy my story of faux fear? Do you feel my fear?
Well, the funny thing is, if I didn't know you, I would not necessarily be 1,000% certain that that is satire and parody. Start from ground zero here, like the step one. People call mass formation psychosis a conspiracy theory or something that doesn't exist. What are your credentials for those who may not know you?
Well, I have a bachelor's of science in mathematics and computer science. I have an MBA with a thesis in operations research. I have an MS in science officially it's in management, but it's in behavioral sciences. And my PhD is in psychology of decision making with one of the leading cognitive psychologists in the world. He just recently retired. I've been a behavioral scientist for 30 plus years. I pioneered the field of evolutionary consumer behavior. So I know one or two things about human behavior.
So let's start with the number one thing. Mass formation psychosis, which we're told doesn't exist, is a conspiracy theory. Oddly enough, the authorities that fact checkers use to debunk it are behavioral or they're so-called behavioral group psychologists, which to me, group behavior is mass formation psychosis by another name. Your professional opinion, Doc, does it exist or does it not exist? And what is it?
It does. And it's hardly the first time that the manifestation of this kind of unhinged collective irrationality has taken place, right? What makes it unique? So, for example, oftentimes, so to your question, and I'll just add to it, many times people ask me, so what you refer to in your book as parasitic idea pathogens, is this a novel thing? So to your question, is mass psychosis something new? It's not new, but the specific parasitic ideas are new. So it's so to draw an analogy, it's not as though viruses didn't exist prior to COVID, but COVID was a new virus, right? So viruses have always existed, but there's now a new manifestation. In 1918, there was the Spanish flu, another virus, okay? So the problem arises today that over the past 50 to 100 years, there is a set of dreadful ideas, all of which were spawned on university campuses. And it took a while to proliferate outside of the ivory tower. And what we're seeing now, in part, which you call mass psychosis, I call, parasitic idea pathogens, is the result of that indoctrination that has been slowly taking place for 50 to 100 years. The reason why I say 50 to 100, because depending on the parasitic idea, you can put a stamp of it's about 100 years ago. So say, for example, cultural relativism, the idea that all cultures are equal and who are we to judge the values of another culture and so on. That came from Franz Boas, a Columbia University professor, about 100 years ago. On the other hand, postmodernism is a movement that started about 50 years ago or so. So between 50 and 100 years is when all the lunacy really started.
And now, I can only think of like two modern eras. You think of Nazi Germany is the classic paradigm of when society descends into madness. You can think of Mao's revolution or Stalinism in general. And some people will say, well, that's not a form of mass group hysteria, or that's more living under tyranny and everyone's too scared to do whatever. But there were true believers in all of those, in as much as we're seeing true believers today. I mean, I guess so. Nothing new. We're tapping into something of human condition, of I would call the weak spirits, the weak minds.
Yeah, exactly. So, and to take your example of, say, the Soviet Union, and I referenced this in the Parasitic Mind, Lysenkoism, okay, was a scientific theory named after Lysenko, who was the head of science under Stalin. They believed that the laws of heredity, the laws of genetics, were not consistent with Marxist philosophy. And therefore, they purported that there is another, more veridical genetic theory, which then became known as Lysenkoism. It, without getting into the technical weeds, it is based on something, an evolutionary theory called Lamarckism, which is a theory of acquired traits, which is not how evolutionary mechanisms operate, at least not when it comes to, say, crossing crops when you're developing an agricultural program. But they thought that that theory was more in line with their Marxist philosophies. So they built their food programs and their agricultural programs in line with this false scientific theory, which then led to the death by starvation of 20 to 30 million people. The reason why I tell that story is because it demonstrates that it's not only, the uneducated that are parasitized by these weak minds, as you said. To the contrary, it's usually the intellectuals who come up with those dreadful ideas. And then because of their imprimatur as experts, they can then pass on those theories to all of the imbeciles out there.
It's like Lysenkoism is kind of amazing, especially when you're talking about farming. It's almost as absurd, but not quite as absurd. Or I guess you've seen Idiocracy, correct?
I know of it. I didn't see it from start to finish.
You absolutely must, because there's a part in it where they're giving Brawndo. Plants need electrolytes. It's got electrolytes, so they're feeding plants basically Gatorade, the movie version of Gatorade, and all the plants are dying. And the guy's like, "Why are you giving the plants Gatorade?" And they say, "Well, it's got electrolytes." It's like, "Do you know what electrolytes do?" And he says, and they say they just need water. And he's like, "The water growing out of the toilet? The water you have in the toilet?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, Mr. Smarty Pants, why don't I see plants growing out of the toilet then?" And it's that level of insanity that you have when the science doesn't work. You make up some sort of political excuse for it. And lo and behold, they had the Dust Bowl in Idiocracy, and they had a famine that killed 20 million people as a result of Lysenkoism.